The elves came to stay when I was 9. They were noisy creatures and we would hear them stomping on an old crib ceiling. We heard them from morning till night. They kept us awake at night. One night when I was particularly unbearable, Papa mustered enough courage and called out. "Excuse me," he said. "Our family would like to sleep. Please resume your banning tomorrow." Of course, we had tried restraining him, for we didn't know how elves would react to such audacity. We got shocked of our lives when silence suddenly filled the house. No more banning, no more stopping from the elves. Papa turned to us smugly. Sheepishly, we turned in for the night, thankful for the respite. When dawn came, the smug look on Papa's face at the night before turned into angry, and shortly before 6, the banning started again, and louder this time. We got up and tried speaking to the elves, but got no response, and stopped at the same hour, 11 o'clock. At exactly 6 a.m. the next day, it started again. What could our poor family do? Papa tried to call an albulario to get rid of our unwelcome housemate, but the woman was booked till the end of week. Meanwhile, the elves had become our alarm clock. When they start their noise, we would get up and do our errand. Papa would start cooking, I would start setting the table, Mama would sweep the whole house, older sister and my cousin would water the plants, and my brother would starting coloring his books. I really didn't expect him to work. He was only 4. After a week, we got hold the album. She spent the night in our house, and by morning, she told us to never bother her again. Elves had already made themselves a part of our life, he said. Brax, the leader of the elves, had spoken to her and had told her that his family had no plans of moving out. They liked things as they were. We eventually settled down to comfortable coexistence with the elves. They woke up at 6. They let us sleep at 11, and in return for the alarm service, we would leave food on the table. By morning, the food would be gone and the table cleaned. All in all, it was a very good relationship. After 3 weeks, the first week of I met Brax, the leader and oldest in the clan, and I met him literally by accident. I was climbing the mango tree in our yard when one of its branches fell and broke my ankle. Pain was so great that I just sat there numb, staring at my ankle, which had begun to turn blue. I could not move or cry out, and to sleep to forget the pain. Last conscious thought was that the ground was too cold to sleep on. I woke to a hand touching my foot. It belonged to someone, something non-human. Hand radiated warmth that seemed to penetrate to my bones. His hand was small, wrinkled and felt like dried prunes. Though I was curious, I kept my eyes closed. I imagined a hideously deformed face with a long and sharp teeth. Would he disappear when I opened my eyes? Or would he devour me? I pretended to be asleep. After several minutes, I could pretend no longer. I was too curious to remain still. When I opened my eyes, the horrible sight that I expected was not there. Instead, there was this old, wrinkled creature, even shorter than I was, although I was the smallest in my class. He wore overalls unlike any clothing I knew of. Its texture was a mixture of green leaves and earth. It clung to his skin and right with a left of its own. Its color continually changed from deep to light green, to dark to light brown, and to green again. It was fascinating to look at. Felt a sense of awe and respect towards the elf. He was good with his hands. My uncle already felt better. He was massaging it with an ointment that smelled nice. Before I could stop myself, I snuffed deeply, bringing the healing aroma of the ointment deeply into my lungs. Detecting my movement, the elf turned to me and smiled kindly, although I didn't see his mouth moving. I could hear him talking. "Don't be afraid," he said. His voice so was soothing that I had to fight my urge to snuggle and sleep in his small arms. I shook my head slightly. What was I supposed to say? "No, elf." I could not. Didn't even know if I was supposed to call him that or just say Tabby or Apo. As if knowing what I was thinking, the elf smiled again. You call me our kind duendes or elves?" "No," I nodded. "I actually don't mind if you call me an elf, but please call me Prax." Seeing my astonished look, Prax laughed. His laugh sounded like the whistling of wind through the trees and a bit like the breaking of the waves on the seashore. I thought it nice and longed to hear more, and I wanted to know more about his kind. Did they have children? Wives? Did they play games like Patintero Habulan? But Prax was not in the mood to chat. He told me that I should have been more careful. I could have been seriously hurt. I nodded absently, thinking that I liked his clothes, his laugh, and his voice. He reminded me of my grandfather who had died a long time ago. Close my eyes, letting Proc's healing message lull me to sleep. 30 minutes later, when I woke up, the elf was gone. Only the lingering fragrance of his balm remained. When Mama and Papa arrived, I told them what had happened. It was really prostrating seeing their reaction. They became pale, then collapsed on the sofa. I had to douse them with water before they revived. Why couldn't they be like other people and be glad that I have been unpreded by a supernatural being? I had told them about my first encounter with a real elf, and they fainted on the spot. I sulked for the rest of evening. Mama told me to never talk to elves again. Or did I forget the countless tales of elves taking people for their kingdom after killing them? I just shrugged. After all, the elf had saved my life. Thought no more of it, and indeed began to enjoy and banging and stopping on our ceiling. Almost wished to be heard again, just I saw could see Prox, but nothing happened, and I passed the rest of my summer days dreaming about playing with elves. I met my second elf in school. I was in grade 3, a transferee to a new public school that I had haunted classroom. My classmates related tales about duendes, white ladies, and capres in our school. I believed their stories readily. I tried to tell them about Prox, but since they were skeptical, I decided to let them be. As it was, I was excluded from their games. Classroom, I chose the seat I felt was the most haunted, the one farthest away from the teacher's table. Nobody wanted to sit near me. Me was a picture of president without the company of my classmate. I expected elves to make their presence felt, so I waited. By the third month in class, we had a very difficult math exam. Our teacher left us and went to gossip outside, and all around me, my classmates were openly copying each other's work. I looked at their papers from my seat, hoping that their scribbles would mean something to me, but the answer would blasted long division eluded me. I looked at the ceiling, trying to see if my brain would work better if head was tilted a certain angle. It did not. I looked to my right, nothing there. Finally, I looked down and I saw this tiny little elf, smaller than Prax by as much as 6 inches, sitting on the bog in front of me, tapping his foot impatiently. "Took you so long to notice?" "I've been here for hours," he said. Gull, did he really think that his race would excuse me his bad manners? I ignored him and frowned at my test paper. What is 3,996 divided by 6? Immediately, he apologized and told me that his name was Bat. He had seen me play outside and thought that I was beautiful, sensitive, and romantic. Did I want him to help my test? Me beautiful, I enthusiastically agreed to let him answer the test. I showed him my paper, and he snorted. For us elves, this is elementary, he said. I wanted to tell him that to us humans these problems are also elementary. Third grade in fact, but I changed my mind. But and I become friends. I help me with my homework and I give me little things such as colored pencil and stationery that were the craze in school. He cautioned me strongly against telling my parents of my friendship with him. After all, he said some people might not understand our relationship. They might forbid us from seeing each other. Thought nothing of it and kept silent about my friendship with Bat. I enjoyed his company for he was very thoughtful. He was a good friend and I thought we would be friends forever. The time came thought when I declared that he loved me. He wanted me to go with him to his kingdom and to be his princess. I refused, of course, for God's sake. I always 9. I didn't know how to cook or do laundry or other things that wives are expected to do. He was an elf, short as I was. He only came up to my knees. What a ridiculous picture he would surely make. He played dead with me for days, but out of spite, I told him that I had already confided to my parents, and they were very angry. It was not true, but Bat didn't know that. He got angry and launched into diatribes about promises being made and broken. Then he vanished. At night, I dreamed that Brax talked to me. He told me that I should have been never offended, but outright. That elf is a stranger in our town. He said we don't know his family. He might be violent. But I had already done what I had done, and there was no use wishing otherwise. I told Brax I'll never worry. After all, he'd always be there for me and my family, right? Wrong, he said. His gift was for giving good luck and for healing minor, non-fatal injuries. What good is that for? I asked. He couldn't answer and left me to a dream of falling houses and shrieking elves. The next day, I got sick and did not get well even after the best doctor in town treated me. My parents had grown desperate, so the albulario was called once more. She told my parents to roast a wool cow, which they did willingly. The albulario and her family feasted on it. When I was still sick after a few days, she instructed my parents to cut my hair. She told them that elves like long hair women. The problem was but like my new look, and in my dream, he was always there, entreating me to go with him. I got sicker than ever. The albulario getting an idea from a dream, then tried her last cure, an ointment taken from the bark of 7 old trees applied to my hair. It cost more than the cow and nobody could enter my room without gagging. The smell was terrible. That did the trick. Apparently, Bat was disgusted, but he would stop at nothing to get me, even if I meant getting my family out of the way. I told him again and again that I didn't love him and would never go with him, but the elf's mind was set. In the end, I just ignored him, for who could reason with an elf and a mad one at that? He did not turn up in my dreams. The next few nights in a week, I was up and running again, and I thought that all was right. Parents decided that I should transfer to another school, this time a sectarian school. Nothing happened. My mother had miscarriage. People blamed the elves and talked about it for a long time. I remember the sad and fearful looks of my parents every day as they heard the banging on our ceiling. Were they friends or were they responsible for the accident? I had never told them about that. Who Prax said was the one behind all this incident? Years passed, and since nothing untoward had happened, since my mother's miscarriage began to let go of our peers. The alarm service continued, and our belief that my mother's miscarriage was the elves' doing was discarded. It was simple, and fetus fate to die before it was born. Bat left town, probably to look for some of his kin to help him, Brax said. It was chilling thought, and with Bat's word, the last time I talked, I was terrified. I laid awake at night thinking of a way to protect my family. I had Brax, but what about them? When I was 12, the banging on our ceiling stopped. We were having lunch, feasting on the pork barbecue my mother had brought after her experiment with chicken curry failed. The sudden cessation of the noise we had been living for the years was jarring. The silence grated on our ears. For the first time, we would hear ourselves breathe. No one moved, even my brother, who was now 7, stopped chewing the pork he had just bitten off the stick. Papa stood up and called the elves. Nobody answered, gesturing for my cousin to follow him. They got the ladder and prepared to climb on the ceiling. They took with them an old wooden crucifix and a bottle of water from the first rain of May. Cousin brought along a 2x2 and a rope. I didn't know what they wanted to do, but we looked on, our barbecue forgotten. Papa went inside the ceiling and my cousin followed. Moments later, they came back running. My cousin descended the ladder first, and I don't know whether it was because of fright or just because he was careless, but a rung broke and he felt the ground back first, hitting the 2x2. He dropped on his highs. He lay there unmoving except for his ragged, breathing, his back bent at angle we never thought possible. Mama fainted. Papa stood still. My sister called an ambulance. My brother wailed, and I sat in the ground laughing. It was not a laugh of gladness, just my nervous reaction to what happened, but they misunderstood, locked me in my room. I cried, shouted, cursed, but remained locked in from inside my room. I would hear them talking, the medical help coming in, and relatives pouring inside our house. I was ignored. I slept and dreamed that an elf was laughing. When I woke up, the whole house was filled by elven laughter. Then my cousin dead. After another year, my little brother followed. He was run over by a postal service van. I can still hear the anguish wail of the driver as he asked for forgiveness. He claimed that a tiny creature had to run in front of his van, and he had swerved to avoid it. Brother was unfortunately playing the roadside, and the van ran straight into him. Witnesses say they had heard laughter, and at exact moment the wheel caught my brother. Driver was impassioned, but the deaths did not stop there. Barely 6 months later, my father drowned while fishing. Big storm, the fisherman said, but for us who were left alive there was no mistaking that our family would die one by one. There were only 3 of us left, my mother, my sister, and I. We tried to seek help, but the policeman laughed in our faces. We were branded as lunatics, and Prax was gone, defeated by Bat and his family apparently on the day the banning stopped. Even the albulario could not help us. What use were her potion and ointment? What the elves needed was a good dose of magic, and the albulario was primarily a healer and exorcist. She had no training when it comes to defending a whole family against vengeful elves. And poor mama, a mere week after my father died, she followed extremely severe. The doctor said, but we knew better. My sister and I left home when I went to live with our relatives in the city, hundreds of kilometers away. We told them about the elves, but they laughed and told us we were being provincial. It is 90s, they said, believe in the little people dead a long time ago. We knew they were wrong. But how could two orphan teenagers convince the skeptics? Perhaps we should have instead on talking more, but as things were, our aunt had already scheduled counseling session for two of us. Fear of being sent to a mental institution stopped us from the further trying to convince them. In the end, we just hoped that the distance from our old house would keep us safe from the elves. But they followed in, one by one. Our foster family dead, car accident, food poisoning, assassination through mistaken identity. Were logical explanation for their deaths, but we knew we had been responsible. We would only look on helplessly and despaired. We would travel again haphazardly enough to let us think that we could outwit the elves, but they finally caught my sister about a year ago. We were on the bus, bound another town when a tire blew out, the bus crashed into ditch and although most on the passengers, including myself were injured. The only fatality was my sister. I realized then that there was no escaping the fury of the little people. After my sister's death, there was only a period of silence from the elves. I decided to continue studying and enrolled at the local. I had no problem with finances. I had inherited a large sum from a relative I had wittingly sent to death. After I got settled in the school dormitory, Brax appeared in my dreams again. He told me about a chant that I had dug up in enormous library for a human psychic he had befriended. It was a weapon against any culture, effectively against those with malicious intention, whether towards human or other creatures. Max thought it would be better if I could defeat Bat myself. After all, hadn't Bat done me great harm already? I agree, and prepared myself for the battle that would decide my fate. It was not long after my conversation with Brax that Bad tracked me down. It was a weekend and I had the room all myself. I looked up from my notes and I saw him much older. His one clear complexion now marred with dark, crisscrossing veins. It screamed from him, and he stooped and walked with great difficulty. He pitied him. He gave me an ultimatum. Go with him or die on the spot. I pretended to look defeated and worn out. My act was effectively and but look please. He wanted us to go immediately, but I dallied at the pretext of packing my few valuable possessions. I told him to wait outside and count to 100. When he was gone, I took out the ingredients I had prepared and the mini stove I had borrowed. I boiled a small amount of sweet milk. I unwrapped Bat's image made me in green and brown clay with strands of his hair given to me by Prax. I started blowing and chanting words that meant nothing to me. Aleph Kazel Zeus hit Melmeltat. Aleph Kazel Zeus hit Melmeltat. Aleph Kazel Zeus hit Melmeltat. Outside the room, Bat's count reached 70. I put aside the image and into the pan I poured hundreds of brand new pins and needles that I had been blessed. The count reached 80. I repeated the chant and immersed the image in the boiling liquid. I waited. Bat's count reached 100, but I did not worry for he had become faint and weak. just Prax had told me, but dissipated into a mist, shrieking, I might add to where. Only God would ever know. Prax appeared again in my dreams that night and told me that day Bat and his family would never bother me again. He himself would move his family away from humans to avoid similar incident in the future. It was not bad he didn't discover the old book with the vanquishing spell earlier, for he could have saved my life. I could not bring them back, he said, but I could build a good life of my own. With the lucky he bestowed on me, I would never be in need for material things the rest of my life. I kissed the old elf, knowing that we would never see each other again. I watched him fade away, seeing the last of my family go. When I woke up, I went to my desk and studied math, remembering where all it began.